All right. Well, thanks for having me here today, and everyone, thanks for sticking around. So, again, my name's Georgen, and I'm originally a mathematician and a physicist by training. But right now, and much more relevant, is I'm the founder and chief architect behind Topl. And what Topl is doing is, okay, that's how this clicker works. What Topl is doing is we're building a blockchain specifically to support investments into developing countries. That's our purpose. That's why we exist. But before I get into any of that, I want to talk a little bit about some of these decentralized tools that are being used to increase trust, increase informational access in developing countries. And I think the developing countries especially is a really powerful context for what the blockchain and decentralization can do. They're ideal use cases for looking at how do we increase trust, how do we increase transparency, how do we increase knowledge and information. So two of the things that we use, two of these technologies that we use are stablecoins and prediction markets. And through this talk, we're going to go into both of those and learn a bit how they work. So first off, who's actually heard of prediction markets or event markets before? All right, only a few people. So what is a prediction market? A prediction market is a trustworthy source of accurate information that doesn't rely on trusted parties or experts of any kind. Now, at first it should seem a little bit contradictory. How is this really happening? And it makes sense that it's contradictory because when we think of accuracy, when we think of, how good someone's guess is going to be, we think of experts. We don't think of a bunch of people in a room randomly assembled giving a good answer. That's not how we think. But the research, the economics behind it all says prediction markets, event markets are accurate. So why is this? But before answering why it's possible, I guess it's probably appropriate to say what is a prediction market. The great thing is you've actually all seen prediction markets. Any sports bet, any bet as to if an event is going to happen, if someone's going to win an election, that's a prediction market. It's just a bunch of people saying that I think the event's going to go this way, or I think the event is going to go this way, and I'm going to put up some wager, some risk to say this is my opinion or this is my thought, and I'm willing to make that wager, make that bet. So how does this work, though? It works for two reasons. The first reason is people want to make money. That's the efficient market hypothesis, essentially, that if there's information out there in the world, if there's some way that I can take information, I can take knowledge and use it to my advantage, I'm going to. So if I have information about a sports team or something like that, I might use that information to make my bet. If I have information about a presidential election or a parliamentary election, I'm going to use that information to make my bet. On the other side of it, that's nice and simple. We all use the information we have. We're all selfish in using that, and that's good. And the other part of it is we're all random. And that's actually really how prediction markets work. If you assemble a bunch of experts, even if they're experts, they have biases. And because they all went to the same universities, because they all attend the same conferences, they all have the same biases. So if they're all wrong together. When you assemble random people anywhere in the world, as long as they're random, all of their biases are going to be random. And if biases are random, they actually cancel each other out. So instead of having to rely on experts, we can rely on just this random group of people to get information about events anywhere in the world. And this is especially powerful in really the developing markets case because we don't have those institutions right now. We don't have those sources of expert information where we can say, this is where I go to get trusted information. This is where I go to get the truth. So we need an alternative. What we're proposing and what a lot of people are interested in is there a decentralized alternative to all of this? All right, so we've created a prediction market now. And as I said, you've all seen these before because the betting market, you gamble on a football match, that's a prediction market. But for anyone who's ever placed a bet like that, tell me, how is it resolved? The game ends and then what? The match ends and then what happens? The casino or the bookie says, this is what happened, this is the answer. So we did this great thing. We had a decentralized way of making a prediction, but then we fall back on old and trusted solutions where we rely on someone to say, this is actually what happened. We're trying to avoid that because we don't want to have to find people that we trust, especially if we're doing something halfway around the world where we have no knowledge. So what can we do instead? Instead, we can play a game. What this game is called a shelling game, and we're actually going to play it right now. So there are 4 squares behind me. Sorry, I'm going to get my lefts and my rights mixed up. There are 4 squares behind me. And the name of the game is for each of you to guess what square everyone else is going to point to. So what does everyone think everyone else is going to point to? Raise your hand if it's the top left blue square that everyone else is going to point to. How about the top right blue square? Bottom left blue square? What about the pink square? Exactly. And that's a shelling game. Because there's one square up there that's unique, it's one pink square and a bunch of other blue squares, what that means is there's one uniquely differentiated point. Well, the cool thing is we can do the same thing with the truth. Only after an event, only one thing actually happened. There's a bunch of stuff that didn't happen, a bunch of non-events, but there was only one thing that happened. So we can use this game to actually find out, how an election went. We can use this game to find out how a sports match, what the final score was, because the only natural point for people to all collect at is the unique one, truth. So that's how our prediction market works. And prediction markets, when they're fully decentralized like this, form an excellent way to get information about, remote places, an excellent way to get information where we don't have experts that we can trust and rely on. And this is decentralized, and that's why it's relevant, and that's why I'm talking about it at a blockchain conference. And then the other thing that we rely on and we're really looking at in developing markets are stable currencies. And currencies and the blockchain obviously form a natural fit together. Bitcoin was the blockchain's original app. Before Ethereum, before smart contracts, before anything else, there was Bitcoin. And it makes a lot of sense that this has implications and this has interest in developing countries. I'm not sure if anyone saw the news the other day that just broke, but the inflation rate in Argentina is currently at such a high rate that it's going to be about worth half of what it was 2 years ago. And the central bank is essentially panicking, and money in Argentina is basically not worth a whole lot anymore. So we don't trust the central banks. We don't like what the governments are doing. So come up with our own solution, Bitcoin. The problem is, as I'm sure everyone in this room knows, Bitcoin hasn't exactly been the best form of money. Sometimes it's been a very good investment, sometimes it's been a very bad investment, but the one thing Bitcoin has never been for us is stable. One thing Bitcoin has never been is boring for us. But if I'm not an investor, if I'm not a trader, if I just want to have money in my pocket, boring is good. I don't need my money to go up, and I certainly don't want it to go down. So boring is good. So Bitcoin was a good first step, but obviously it wasn't everything. Which is why there's a lot of projects out there that are stablecoins. Does anyone, just show of hands, has anyone heard of some of these? Maybe Tether, maybe BitShares, Digix. Obviously no one's heard of Topl, that's why I'm here talking about it. But the point is, there's a lot of interest in stablecoins and a lot of different models. For instance, Tether and Digix, it's a very simple model. We're going to take some asset, could be fiat currency, could be gold, lock it away, put it in a vault, put it in a bank account, and allow people to access it and use the value of it anywhere in the world. So I can have the US dollar, the stability of the US dollar, the power of the US dollar, and I could be using it on my phone, somewhere in South Africa or somewhere in India. Or if I want to be using gold as my store of value, I could be using it to buy things in Venezuela, even when the fiat currency isn't worth anything. So there's huge implications for how to give someone better money, how to give someone the stability and the trust of knowing that what I have today is going to be worth exactly what I have tomorrow. Those are stable coins, and stable coins are another critical piece of fitting the blockchain into the developing world and developing markets. But returning back, away from these tools a little bit to look at, the motivations of why Topl is doing what it's doing and why I'm giving this talk. It's our belief that the blockchain fits in extraordinarily well with the developing world and with developing markets. And it's for exactly the reasons I was saying before. It's because right now we have a lack of trust. It's because we have a lack of transparency, because we have a lack of financial and trusted institutions where we can turn to for information, where we could turn to get good analyses of what the market is going to do. So we need an alternative. It's our belief that the blockchain is that alternative. But in addition to all of that, there is a funding problem. So in 2015, the UN came out with what were known as the SDGs, or Sustainable Development Goals. This is a set of 17 broad initiatives, mostly focused on developing markets, saying, how can we as a world reduce poverty? How can we as a world provide more clean water, better access to sanitary food? How can we as a world provide clean energy in places that maybe don't even have energy now? How can we empower women around the world? So there were 17 initiatives. And unfortunately, those are woefully underfunded right now. Unfortunately, right now, there's about a 2 trillion euro funding gap each year building up here. So you've got this, big social problem that's mostly concentrated in developing markets. And then on the other side, you have this huge economic gap. And, as we just learned in our last talk, I can say it's a huge economic problem, a huge gap, or I can tell you it's a huge economic opportunity. I'm going to choose to call it that right now. It's a huge economic opportunity. So if you were to increase, for instance, the average income in these countries from where it is now to about 10,000 euros, still, about a quarter of what it is in the Netherlands, that would be an increase in economic growth of $32 trillion. That's $32 trillion added to the global economy. That's just around every year. That's new investment returns, that's new activity. And that's just bringing it up to 10,000. It gets even bigger, obviously, if Africa were to someday come up to the same standard of living as we have here in Europe, or we had here, or I had back in North America, where I'm from. So those are really the two big things that we're looking at as Topl as to why we think the blockchain decentralization fits so well into this context. But obviously, there's a question here. If I just outlined two enormous problems, two enormous opportunities, it's a natural question as to why these problems persist. Why hasn't someone already seized this opportunity, and why isn't it gone? Well, to answer that question, I would like to ask who started a business, got involved in starting a business of their own. All right. Now, I would wonder of those people, would you still have made that decision if the best money you could have gotten was a loan for about 45 or 50%? That exactly is what's happening in Argentina right now. The bank rate is at 40%, which means you as a person or you as a business, congratulations, you've just been approved for a loan at 50 or 55%. That's why there's not funding moving into these places. That's why there's not more economic activity, because no one can start a business. No one can finance the things they're trying to do. And that's a problem we're trying to solve. And importantly, when looking at solving these problems, it's much bigger than a specific service. It's much bigger than finding a fund to go invest in certain opportunities. What's really missing is infrastructure. What's really missing are the informational and the value pathways to actually transact and move information, to transact and move value. And I'm guessing, as everyone knows, that's what the blockchain excels at. The blockchain excels at being an infrastructure, being a way to communicate from point A to point B trustlessly, to move value, to move information, to move any of that. So we're applying this infrastructure idea to funding in developing countries. And how are we doing that? So obviously, because it was on my slides earlier, we're doing this partially through smart contracts. And that's kind of the other tool of the blockchain that applies excellently to these contexts. Because when you have complex arrangements, when you have different incentives that all need to be aligned, smart contracts work really well for that. And so in our particular cases, what you're looking at is you're looking at projects that are being sourced onto the blockchain through a network of local partners. And so we have a project that comes onto the blockchain to list its opportunity. Then you have a group of investors that would want to look at that opportunity and say, do I want to invest in this? And then we have a group of philanthropic organizations that are saying, is there a social impact here that can be had? And if there's a social impact, I want to invest in that too. So we have very complex, multiple incentives all floating around, and they need to be aligned, and everyone needs to know exactly what's happening at each stage. So that's why smart contracts come into play. And we'll skip this part. And then so far, and this is something I'm incredibly proud about, but I also think is relevant here. So far, we've sourced projects from about 4 or 5 different countries around the world. So far, we've sourced projects in Colombia, South Africa, India, and Ghana. Now, why do I say this other than I'm just really proud of what my team's done so far? No, I say this because even as a small project in the blockchain space, there's already huge distribution in where this is coming from. So if I'm running one office with one set of servers here in Amsterdam or something like that, how is that appropriate for a project that is literally touching every corner of the earth? How is it appropriate to centralize everything but say, I want to help everywhere? So again, it's a natural fit for the blockchain. And then just because I really can't get around saying something a little bit technical, especially since my CTO is sitting in the audience right now, and I know a lot of people here are technical as well. When we went out to build our own blockchain, it was a tough decision to not just take the easy route and build on top of Ethereum, but we knew there was a lot happening. We knew we had huge scalability, huge security concerns, so we built our own blockchain. If anyone wants to learn more about that, I'm going to point to Nick. He's going to raise his hand, and you can annoy him with questions afterwards, because that's not my forte. I've completely lost track of time, by the way, so I don't even know. Okay, awesome. Yeah, sorry, because I just realized that this is so I have a clock in front of me, not a timer. So I was trying to watch it go down to 0. It's not going down to 0. It never will go down to 0. So actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce my team, and then I'm going to leave the rest of this time for questions. So again, I'm Chris. I'm a mathematician by training. I'm joined by 2 of my co-founders, Kim and Nick. Kim is a statistician and economist, so she's really the one figuring out how do you do risk assessment on businesses halfway around the world? How do you track what the Latin American economy is going to do over the next 5 years? And it's Nick's job to actually implement all of our crazy ideas and make sure they run on a blockchain. So that's all I have for you. If anyone's interested to learn more or actually start playing around with a blockchain that is for investing in developing countries, we've got a live demo and a live testnet running off of our code on GitHub. So you can download that. You can set up a client. You start playing around, making contracts, sending money, all those fun things. And myself and my team will be around. We're the booth right as you're walking out. So if you've got more questions after this little Q&A, come find us. We'd love to talk to you. Thanks.
So does anyone have a question? I have one otherwise, which is you're going to be working with the UN, right?
Yes.
That's cool, and they're embracing blockchain. Previously, they've been a slow-moving organization, but by embracing blockchain, they're showing that they don't want to be like that. So how's that process going? And
Yeah. So working with the UN and working with world banks and applying blockchain, it really gives them the opportunity to change their model, and it's exactly what they're doing. Because previously, the UN works on its own. Previously, the World Bank works on its own. It doesn't use, us. It doesn't use public money. But the blockchain allows them to do that. So the UN can now be one actor in the development framework. And that's a much easier pill for them to swallow. It's much easier for them to join on to something and move very quickly than develop their own processes, their own infrastructure. And historically, that's, I think, why they've been so slow. But they actually have been moving fairly quickly and saying, we'll sign on to be a part of this. And obviously, it's the UN. It's a pretty big part of anything they do, but it's still a fundamental difference between being something complete and being a part of something. So, that blockchain, that decentralization aspect, serves well to move big institutions a bit faster.
Cool. I think it's exciting,
Yeah.
You crack that and the rest of the world's your oyster,
That's what we're hoping for, yes.
Lovely. So thank you very much. And they're around, so do grab them for questions, yeah?
Thank you.
Thank you.